I consider my years with Richard Fontaine and Zenith Films as a solid foundation for my entrance into the adult entertainment industry. As the electric yo-yo boy danced from coast to coast, I was fortunate enough to meet many theater owners and make contacts along the way. My years with Richard were fun, to say the least. Um, Night Intruder was the first feature film that I appeared in, along with a companion feature called The Big Move. Later went to work on his Dream Boy magazine, and I appeared as a model, but I was also co-editor for the magazine. Um, I guess the most interesting films uh, have yet to be seen. Earthchild Naked Under the World was a gift that Richard gave to me. I directed, I wrote it, and he produced it for me. It was intended to be and is an art film, and I did play the Cinematheque 16 on Sunset Boulevard, where it had an early death. Um, the market was just not ready for it yet. Happy Birthday Davy, on the other hand, was a big success and an invited entry into the Bordeaux Film Festival in France. That was my last film with Richard. But I will always remember that hotly contested Oscar nomination film, The Chocolate-Covered Crotch. Now there was something to be seen. Boylesk started in the garage and was a labor of love between my partner, William Mann, myself, a dear friend from San Francisco State College, Larry Allen Phillips, and a professor of San Francisco State College, Mr. Hugo Milchione. We were kiddies in a garage, and we were going to put on a show. And here are some of the drawings that Hugo did and designs that we had in mind at the time. At this point, though, we had no backers. We had no idea where we were going with it. We were just going to put on a show. We did a series of private parties at the house on Alfred Street, looking for interested parties. And finally, we did book it into the Coronet Theater, but we had many private party shows before then. Some of the facts that probably you might find surprising. Jack Wrangler, who was then Jack Stillman, was one of my photographic models at the time, and he did some preliminary publicity photos for me. He never appeared in the first show, but he did appear in several shows later on down the road. And there were many later on shows down the road. Leather and Levi Guys was a Boylesk production. Um, then I went back to New York and did Boylesk at the Eros One Theater. And then I returned to the West Coast and did some more. And here's some flyers of the day, and that'll give you an indication of how it all took place. There essentially are three stages of Boylesque. There's the original Boylesque concept, and then we moved to the Burley Tool review in New York City. And then on returning to the West Coast, my major thrust into the X-rated industry, the Sex Machines Company. And that was the company, and I'm proud to say it, and I'm sorry he's not here to enjoy this, but Jack Wrangler was my star. And all I can say is, God bless Jack Wrangler. If ever I had a Broadway angel, I would have to say it was Miss Shelley Wilson of the Eros One Theater. If it were not for Shelley, the Burley Tool Review never would have happened. Here was a lady that if you wanted a split-level stage, she'd have one built for you. If you wanted a dimmer board and a complete light setup, she'd have one installed for you. Whatever you needed tech-wise, she was there with the money. And make no mistake, she was very, very generous. During the early Boylesque run at the Eros, there was a young dancer by the name of Andy Scarpella. We billed him as Mr. Rocco. Now, the thing about Andy was he was a model, and he was always seeking work in New York. He was a very well-known model for a photographer by the name of Roy Blakey. But Shelley saw the value in Andy and had a 6-foot photograph posted outside the theater proclaiming his appearance. Now, anybody who is a model in New York at this time knows the value of that kind of publicity, and so did Andy, a.k.a. Mr. Rocco. I have no knowledge of whatever happened to Andy, but I'm sure he's doing well. And here's a photograph of that blow-up. Burley Tool was a showcase presentation of legitimate Broadway performers seeking work. They came in, provided their own costumes, rehearsed the show, and Ronnie Britton was the choreographer for it. We weren't supposed to do it this way, but we did it anyway because we were interested in showing our talents to the various agencies in New York City. That basically is the reason for the Burley Tool Review. However, on preview night, when Shelley came down to see it, she was extremely pleased with the presentation. She knew we were trying to upgrade the male burlesque concept, which had grown somewhat tawdry in the downtown New York area at the time. One of our biggest surprises, though, was on opening day, Mr. Blackwell showed up as an audience member, undoubtedly invited by the infamous Shelley Wilson. Although everybody gave their best shot for the show, it was not to be. God hammered New York City with a ferocious snowstorm which closed every theater in town. Without box office, we could not exist, so the show closed. But the photographs, I think, speak highly of our effort. I returned to the West Coast very disillusioned and very tired because it was an extremely exhausting experience for me. After the Burley Tool show closed at the Eros, I returned to West Hollywood and found myself a very cheap apartment on Sunset Boulevard, just down the street from that famous drugstore where Lana Turner had been discovered in that very tight sweater. By this time, credit cards and credit advances were a way of life, and I was heavily, heavily in debt. Most people are unaware of the fact that the Boylesque adventure was mostly out of my own pocket, and I had managed to sustain those years with employment under the Theatrical Wardrobe Attendants Union, Local 768 in Hollywood, which was my main source of bread and butter. By this time, I was well aware of the Hollywood contract, the ones that you signed in disappearing ink. I returned to my former employers at the Paris Theater and asked if I could do some live shows as a showcase presentation. You would have thought by this time I would have learned the lesson, but no, show business is show business and the show must go on. This is where Jack and I finally reconnected all over again. He came to the Paris Theater one afternoon seeking a job. And at that time, I was doing live presentations there, one-man performances. So we created Jack Wrangler, and Jack did his one-man show at the Paris Main Stage Theater for several weeks. Later on down the highway, I was lucky enough to land a job at the Schubert Theater in Century City, working on Michael Bennett's The Chorus Line. And it was the chorus line, basically, that funded or gave me the resources and money to create the Sex Machines Company. It took me about a year to come up with the formal presentation to the various corporations that were involved at this point in time. And here is a printed presentation of what the original Sex Machines concept was supposed to be about. This was the point in time when I said to myself, gee, kid, I think you finally made it. Because I had become somewhat of a celebrity in the little town of West Hollywood, and interviewers were at the door seeking information about what I was up to now. A magazine, National, hit the stands. It was called In Heat, and in it was a quite detailed interview. And all was going according to Hoyle until that magazine hit the national stands. when the interview broke, you've heard the phrase, greed works. Well, in this particular case, greed did not work. The corporations involved were at each other's throat. I became a witness to what has got to be the most grievous hostile takeover in the history of Hollywood. Each wanted the product, but nobody was willing to sit down at the negotiating table and make a deal. I had suggested to them all that a security bond be posted first, an idea which didn't sit too well with any of the corporate CEOs. Jack Wrangler was to have appeared in a show that I wrote especially for him, entitled The Hard Hat. And that was supposed to be our premiere production. However, the group that I had assembled was being deluged by offers, and they were in need of work, and I hold nothing against them, and they were in need of money, and I hold nothing against them, and they went and did what they had to do. Jack opened his one-man show at the Spartan Theater in San Francisco, and I opened the premiere Hard Hat production, which was under the Sex Machines banner, at the Vista Theater as a showcase presentation again, uh, with an assembled cast. I gave Jack a free advertisement at the Spartan Theater, and I wished him well. He sent me a $50 check for the placement. He was paid $500 for that week's engagement. And that was the sole monies that I ever received from the Sex Machines company. Mr. Robert Opel, remember Bob? Remember the Hollywood Streaker? Remember David Niven? Well, I was downstairs at the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion handing out tuxedos. I'll let you fill in the blanks. But Bob was a videographer by this time, and he did come to the Vista Theater, and he recorded The Hard Hat for eternity. And somewhere out there in Videoland, The Hard Hat exists. And that was my final presentation to Hollywood. I left to find my own search for the Holy Grail. God bless.